I, 28 male, just found out that my wife, 29 female, has been cheating on me with our dog walker. We got married young and have been together for about 8 years. Everything has always seemed perfect from the outside looking in. Our friends would always tell us how much they envied our relationship, and that was something we kind of loved. However, we had our share of troubles. We were just really good at hiding them. Almost nobody in our lives knew this, but we separated a few years ago, and we thought we might divorce. But the old saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder, really proved to be true with us. After we got back together, we were stronger than ever. Both my wife and I wanted children, but due to some health issues, my wife, as we knew that a pregnancy for her would be very high risk. Our plan was always to try and adopt a child once we had the financial ability to do so. At the start of the pandemic, she and I were part of the big puppy boom that happened. Since both of us were home so much, we decided it would be the perfect time to adopt. We adopted a golden retriever pup from rescue, and it quickly became the central focus of our lives. We thought that since we would both be home with it all the time, there wouldn't be any issues, but neither of us was prepared for the energy this dog had. If we didn't let it out to run several times a day, then it would tear our house apart while it was trying to exert some of its excess energy. We ended up hiring a dog walker who would come to the house a few times a day while we were working, to take him out on long walks, run with him, take him to the park, etc. The guy we hired was a graduate student at the local university, who was just trying to save up some money while he was in school. When I first met him, I thought that he was a nice kid. He loved the dog, and he was friendly enough with clients. When everything started to go into the green, my usual workload resumed, and I was traveling again. My wife was still working remotely, so there were a lot of nights that I had to leave her home alone. We had both been huge true crime podcast listeners, so we were a bit paranoid about her being alone. So we had a pretty solid security system installed throughout the entire house. One night I was working late, my team had an overseas conference call, and I hadn't planned on being home until at least 8 p.m. I got a notification on my phone that one of the cameras at my house had been turned off. I stepped away and took a look through all of the cameras on my phone and realized that one of the hall cameras had gone out. It struck me as very odd. And like I said, we were a bit paranoid about crime, so I was worried. I called my wife right away to make sure she was all right, but I didn't get any answer. That only made my paranoia worse. I looked through the other cameras to see if I saw any sign of my wife or an intruder, but I didn't see anything. I called her again, and still, there was no answer. After explaining my concerns to my coworkers, everybody agreed that it would be best for me to leave, just to make sure everything was all right. God forbid anything happened, and I was stuck at work. I drove back to the house as quickly as I could and rushed inside, screaming my wife's name while I went looking for her. My dog ran right up to me, jumping on me like he always does, acting like nothing was happening. That eased some of my worries, but I still needed to get eyes on my wife. I ran up to the bedroom, taking a brief glance at the camera in the hall to see that it was fine. When I turned the knob on our bedroom door, it was locked. I banged on it and called my wife's name, hearing a little bit of scuffling behind the door. I've never been much a hostage type of guy, but I thought something was happening inside of the room, so I kicked the door in. I walked through the broken door frame and saw my wife completely naked and actively trying to hide our dog walker in the closet. They both froze when they saw me. The camera being shut off suddenly made sense. If she was sneaking him into our bedroom, she didn't want to leave any trail behind for me to potentially see. I was in complete shock when I saw it. My adrenaline was still pumping from thinking that there was some sort of intruder in the house. My wife was trying to say something to me, but I can hardly hear anything she was saying. The only thing that I was focusing on was the man in my closet. I wanted to rip his head off, but I knew that getting physical was only going to hurt me in the end. Without saying anything at all, I walked right out of the house and drove away. My phone was blowing up from my wife, as well as some of my coworkers, making sure everything was okay. A few days passed, and I just tried to think about my next steps moving forward. I was definitely going to be divorcing my wife. There was no chance that I would be staying with her and potentially raising a child with her after what she did. I confessed what happened to one of my coworkers, and they helped me to figure out a way to get back at them both. We had actually recommended the dog walker to a lot of people in our neighborhood, because we liked him so much when he first started. On top of that, my wife was very involved in the community service circle in our town. That's actually where she found most of her friends. In hindsight, their sleeping together was very clearly premeditated. If my wife had the foresight to turn off the cameras to hide him, then they must have had some kind of chat about it. I looked through our phone bill, tried to find any messages between them, and I found a treasure trove of explicit messages they exchanged. With the help of my coworker, we published a small little pamphlet full of the details of their affair, which had apparently been going on for quite some time. This was just the first time they had done it in the house. I went door to door and handed the pamphlets directly to the adults of the houses. I watched their faces for a moment when they realized what it was. It was scandalous news, and I just knew that they would be talking about it for a while. My wife was treated like a laborer in the neighborhood after that. All of the friends she made during the time we lived there turned their backs on her, and she was all alone. On top of that, the dog walker was fired from more than half of the job he had in our neighborhood. After I turned to everyone we knew against her, my wife didn't put up a fight during the divorce. I had enough evidence anyway to keep her away from all of the assets. I got to keep the house, which I turned around and sold shortly after everything was settled. Now I'm ready to move on with my life and forget all about her and hopefully find someone else that I can be happy with moving forward. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that. I can't help but wonder how much longer it might have persisted, had she not altered the cameras in your security system? From the sounds of it, their affair started when you began traveling for work more often. It's such a shame that she would take advantage of that time by betraying you. It's good that your friends and neighbors realized that she had wronged you and cut her off too, and it's even better that the dog walker lost so many of his clients. I wish you the best of luck moving forward, and I hope you can find someone else who makes you happy. Now let's move on to our next story. I, 33 male, have been with my wife, 30 female, for a little over 5 years now. She and I have a pretty standard marriage. There's nothing really to know about it. We have one child together. We both work, and we take a vacation once a year as a family. It's just your average middle-class suburban lifestyle. I've always known that my wife has wanted to be a writer. So last year, we discussed our options and we figured out a way for her to try and pursue those dreams. She had a wonderful idea for a novel, and we decided to bite the bullet and struggle for a few months while she buckled down and wrote it. The writing went well, and eventually she had her first full draft. After countless revisions on her end, she ended up looking for an agent to try and represent her so she could publish it. Somehow, that was more difficult than writing the actual novel. We found some recommendations from Reddit about how a lot of conventions have time dedicated to pitching agents. We found a convention nearby and bought her a ticket. We couldn't both afford to go, so I stayed home with our son while she made some connections in the industry and sent out her manuscript. She came back the following Monday, and we didn't know for sure if she had any solid offers or not. After a few days, we got a call from an agent who wanted to represent her. We were over the moon. This particular agent had represented a lot of big-name authors and even had some bestsellers under their belt. I was extremely proud of my wife. She had put so much work into her novel. And it seemed like the risk that we'd taken with her quitting her full-time job was about to pay off. The agent lived in New York City and represented several authors in the Mid-Atlantic area. We didn't live too far from there, so it wasn't out of the picture for my wife to travel into the city to meet with him. They both set a standing date for every other Friday to meet at his office in the city so they could discuss potential publishers, editing, film, and television rights, etc. I was under the impression that the agent would have wanted what was best for her, since they would be getting a cut of whatever deal the publishers made for her manuscript. What I didn't know was that he only agreed to represent her because he wanted to sleep with her. I wasn't worried for the first month of their relationship, but when their meetings became more frequent and my wife was going to New York once a week or more, I started to get suspicious. I would ask her if they were making any progress, and she would tell me that they were working on it, but couldn't give many details. She told me that she was scheduled to meet with publishers, but wouldn't give any specifics. Before that, everything she told me would be full of details. I couldn't shake the feeling something was up. When I asked her if there was something going on, she got angry. She made it seem like I was crazy and jealous for even thinking she could have been up to something. One weekend, she was scheduled to go to the city to see her agent again. She told me that she had a couple of important meetings with publishers lined up, so she would be staying in hotel overnight. My gut was telling me it was a lie, so I decided to follow her. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I felt like she was lying, and I just needed to clear a few things up. I dropped our son off with my mom for the weekend and followed her to New York. I started to think that maybe I was overreacting, but waited anyway. About an hour of waiting passed, and she walked out with her agent. They were laughing, and he had his hand on her back. That was a bad enough sign for me to continue watching them. They went to his car, leaving hers behind in the garage. I continued following them to see if anything else happened. First, they went to a nice restaurant together and ate outdoors, sharing a bottle of wine and holding each other's hands. I made sure to take some photos for evidence if needed in the future. Toward the end of what I realized was their date, her agent leaned over and kissed her. I was angry and hurt, but I needed to see what was going to happen with my own eyes. I followed them back to his townhouse, where I was no longer able to see them, but by the music I could hear playing, I could only assume they were sleeping together. I drove back home, taking advantage of my son not being there to go into my wife's office without any witnesses. I tried to log into her computer, but the password I thought she would use didn't work. I realized then that she had something to hide on that computer. In any other circumstance, my wife's forgetfulness would have annoyed me, but I was able to find the username and password written down on a note. When I logged in, I found dozens of saved pictures and videos of her agent. In some of the conversations they had, it was clear he was role-playing some kind of weird power dynamic thing between them. Honestly, by the looks of it, he agreed to represent her entirely because of her looks. Before I left her office, I printed some of their chats and started planning how to expose them both. I figured if the agency that he worked for knew that he had done something so unethical, they would drop him, so I reached out to them to see. It had taken several days for me to hear anything back from the senior partner of the agency. By the time they called me to listen to what I had to say, my wife was already back home and planning her next trip to the city. I told them everything, emailed the chance, and explained how the agent hadn't actually done anything to help with the novel. The partner told me that what he did was a breach of the agency's ethics, and they would be dealing with him. I asked about what would happen with my wife's representation, and they told me that they would have another agent evaluate her work and see if there was a place for her. A few days pass and I'm sitting in the living room watching cartoons with my son, and my wife came running out of her office in tears. She said that the agency had dropped her because her agent was fired and no other agents wanted to take on her work. I sent my son to his room and told her to sit down. Then I explained what I did and how I was planning on divorcing her. She tried to deny it and tell me I was crazy, but I showed her the evidence. Everything was in my name, so I told her she had a week to find somewhere else to stay before I put the house up on the market, and then I would be at my mother's house with our son while she was getting everything sorted out. I grabbed my son and walked away from her, knowing that it was probably the worst day of her life, and she had no one to turn to. I'm so sorry you had to go through something like this. You made sacrifices for your wife to follow her dreams, and she repaid them by betraying you. The agent's intentions seem very clear. They never actually planned on helping her publish her book. Your wife definitely trying to gaslight you into believing their relationship was professional when it was not. You did a good job by following your gut and looking into their relationship further. It's clear that she had no intention to come clean and tell you. She even tried to hide it from you. From what you described, it sounds like you handled telling the senior partner of the agency with maturity. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.